This video discusses and shows examples and the success or failure of all the various mechanical or manual methods experienced by the Lake Lawrence Lake Management District that can be used to care for a lake, from harvesting, rotivation, applying bottom barrier material, manually raking vegetation, to pulling, digging, and cutting. It discusses biological control efforts studied, such as introduction of grass carp and then use of chemicals when other methods were not successful, and how successful those methods or chemical applications were. All of these have been tried over the last 38 years, and some continue to be used. This video provides details on the many efforts taken by the Lake Management District over those years to operationalize the many studies and how the Lake Management District went about trying to improve water quality in Lake Lawrence to sustain its beauty and recreational benefit for future generations. This is a partner video to the Death of the Lake video. A link to that video will be provided at the end. Subscribe to this YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen so you know what has been done, what is being done now, and what is intended for the future. Go to the Lake Lawrence Lake Management District website at lakelawrencelakemanagementdistrict.com to explore the many studies, lake surveys, and water sampling and testing that has been done over the years, and much more. The Lake Lawrence Lake Management District was the first lake management district formed in Washington State in 1986. The RCW, or the Revised Code of Washington, was put in place in 1985. The code was later amended to include beaches. The residents of Lake Lawrence have been exploring different methods to stop toxic algae blooms and reverse seemingly endless and excessive quantities of floating and aquatic vegetation in the lake due to unusually high nutrient levels. When the Lake Management District was formed in 1986, floating vegetation covered over 88 acres of this 320-acre lake, and aquatic vegetation was so dense boating and other recreational activities frequently had to be canceled due to safety concerns. The Lake Management District immediately started mechanical harvesting as a method to control vegetation. For over 20 years, from 1986 through 2007, Lake Lawrence harvested or mowed invasive and nuisance aquatic plants annually, sometimes twice a year. Harvesting or mowing only removes the top 2 feet of the aquatic plant and requires 3 feet or more of water for the harvester to work. Mowing in the shallow littoral areas is difficult and sometimes impossible. It will not work around docks, so vegetation there continues to grow and cause problems, requiring residents to rake the weeds out of the water. The vegetation grows back in a few weeks. Mowing is expensive, costing approximately $2,000 an acre as of 2023. Just like mowing your yard with a collection bag, some clippings escape the bagger and are spread throughout the lake, floating around until they come to rest and start new plants in areas where they had not grown before. Although harvesters are better than they were back 20 years ago, they still do not collect all cut vegetation. Because of this, the Lake Management District stopped mowing in 2007. Some lakes still utilize harvesters in specific areas to help open up heavily used corridors for boat traffic. This is an option we will always keep in our tool bag and use when and where needed. We all know that boat props chop up vegetation if allowed to grow uncontrolled, and this also spreads vegetation throughout the lake. In 1988 and 1989, in a continuing effort to reduce floating vegetation and find other methods to prevent use of chemicals, Bethnic bottom barrier material was installed on the lake bed in the canal and other areas in an attempt to control high concentrations of fragrant water lily. A Bethnic barrier is a piece of material, a film or a sheet-like substance like the one shown here, that lays on the bethnos layer of the lake or pond to keep sunlight from getting to the nutrient-rich soil on the lake bottom. The material is usually heavier than water, which allows it to settle firmly on the lake's bottom. In most cases, additional weight or pins or stakes are needed to keep the material in place. Gases of decomposition forming under the material can be a problem, causing the material to erupt from the bottom. This method was not found to control fragrant water lily, and within a couple years the barrier material started pulling up or erupting from the bottom and became an expensive and labor-intensive endeavor to remove. Today, a 20 or 30-foot piece of barrier material costs approximately $250. As you can see in the video, bottom barrier material was used again in a small swim area along the Lake Lawrence Community Club Park in 2021 to prevent rush, a common native shoreline vegetation, from growing into the swim area. rush covered this area was removed and the bottom barrier material applied. You can see the rush on the edges of the swim area, and it has not grown back into the swim area. In 1989, a lake restoration study was commissioned to identify better methods to control invasive and nuisance vegetation. This study took over a year to complete. Before the restoration study was completed, the Lake Management District was encouraged to look into the feasibility of controlling aquatic plants using sterile triploid grass carp. Triploid grass carp eat only aquatic vegetation. The study was done by the University of Washington School of Fisheries and published in October 1990. Again, the Lake Management District was searching for any method to control the excessive and continually growing vegetation short of using chemicals. The study showed that introduction of grass carp could potentially harm the largemouth bass population when the grass carp dined on aquatic plants beneficial to the largemouth bass. It also found that previous worldwide studies indicated that algae may be more of a water quality concern than the decaying aquatic vegetation, and the use of grass carp may accelerate this problem because their feces is all nutrients and would exacerbate the algae problem that already existed in the lake. The Department of Fish and Wildlife did not support the introduction of grass carp because of the potential harm to the bass population and native aquatic vegetation. For these reasons, the Lake Management District Steering Committee voted not to introduce grass carp into the lake. In the Phase 1 study, 21 Lake Management District members participated. The study found that the lake had a high nutrient level characterized by high algal densities, oxygen-depleted bottom barriers, and abundant aquatic plant growth, which frequently impaired recreational activities. These first two spreadsheets show the results of water testing done as part of this study in 1990. They show that the overall trophic state of the lake was eutrophic or dying, the worst category any lake can have. They also show the dissolved oxygen levels in the deeper portions of the lake are well below levels needed for healthy fish populations. In 2016, Thurston County Environmental Health Department started conducting regular water quality testing of several lakes in the county, including Lake Lawrence. Their data starts to be seen at the bottom of the second spreadsheet and all subsequent spreadsheets, along with toxic algae testing results in the last 5 columns of each spreadsheet. These spreadsheets show the sequential order of testing and toxic algae incidents on Lake Lawrence. As can be seen, the eutrophic state of the lake continued to decline. However, the dissolved oxygen levels in the deeper portions of the lake started to show better results, although still well below levels needed for good fish habitat, particularly during summer months. It needs to be noted here that water quality testing is only done between the months of May and October. I realize you may not be able to see clearly all the information on these spreadsheets. However, if interested, all that information is available on the Lake Lawrence Lake Management District.com website. The study also showed that the algal community was dominated by blue-green algae, much more so than found in many other lakes in western Washington. This form of algae has many adverse effects on both people and animals. The primary cause of the water quality problems and biological impacts is the excessive levels of nutrients, especially phosphorus, in the lake. The study showed that roughly 83% of the phosphorus in the lake was caused by internal loading or release of phosphorus from lake sediments, a direct result of years of sawmills and nutrients washed in from the Deschutes River from the 1880s to the late 1920s, and agriculture from the late 1920s to present day. The decomposition of large quantities of aquatic plants and algae added to this already phosphorus-rich sediment and was identified as another internal loading source of phosphorus. The study revealed that roughly 10% of the phosphorus nutrient loading of the lake came from the groundwater or the natural springs that come up in the lake bottom. Overland flow and precipitation together accounted for another 7% of the total phosphorus loading. Wastewater inputs from septic systems and home gutters appeared to represent a relatively small fraction of the total groundwater nutrient load to the lake. In July 1990, as part of the Phase 1 study, EnviroScan conducted an aerial shoreline analysis, or ASA, of Lake Lawrence that is included in Appendix D of the study. An ASA is a remote sense technique that can be used as a screening tool to direct potential pollution inputs to lakes. The shoreline is photographed in both the infrared and visible regions of the spectrum and then analyzed for sources of contamination. More specifically, The methodology identifies possible point sources as well as non-point inputs from urban runoff, agriculture, construction, land disposal, including septic tanks, or other sources of toxic or nutrient input, effectively locating specific sites of suspected pollution for further ground truthing. The ASA was conducted along the entire shoreline of Lake Lawrence. As you can see, the codes combined with the impact ratings show where the imagery identified potential pollution sources. Significant problem sites are highlighted with a black circle at the end of their rating. Back in 1990, these were the primary areas of concern. We have posted an extract of the Phase 1 study and Appendix D to the Lake Lawrence website under Documents that provides a detailed explanation referencing the specific map positions using references L1 through L46 to more specifically pinpoint the areas in reference to the map. What this ASA showed was that direct pipe discharge from on-site treatment systems, septic tanks, was not evident at Lake Lawrence. Hydraulic failure of septic systems around the lake was not obvious and did not appear to represent a major source of nutrients to the lake. The largest area of contamination identified was from urban runoff, construction, and agriculture. Urban runoff would be stormwater runoff from roads, culverts, drainage areas, yards where you would expect some pet waste and fertilizer use, and community and public parks. Non-point pollution impacts was evident at several sites around the lake, a result of stormwater runoff. Overland flow to the lake was evident. Much of the non-point pollution during stormwater runoff across community parks and lawns most likely came from the excessively high resident geese population that were frequent visitors to those areas, or fertilizer. What this study showed is the vast majority of nutrients are already in the lake and building up every year from aquatic plants dying, composting, and regrowing, not from other external sources. The final recommendation for this study was to dredge the lake at a cost in 1991 of $4.5 million if local farmers would allow the sediment to deposit it on their land and it did not have to be hauled to a waste disposal facility. Based on the Phase 1 restoration analysis, Lake Lawrence commissioned a dredging study. The Lake Lawrence Restoration Project Final Dredge and Disposal Design Report was prepared by Hartman Associates out of Seattle and issued to the Lake Management District in September 1995. The dredge study found that 127 acres, or 38% of our 330-acre lake, are covered with more than 20 feet of sediment delivered into our lake by the mills and mud sediment that the canal brought into Lake Lawrence from the Deschutes River. The remaining areas of the lake have organic sediment averaging 1 to 6 feet in depth. To dredge the volume of sediment required to bring down phosphorus loading, approximately 4.1 million cubic yards of sediment would need to be removed at a cost of $47 million and take approximately 12 years. From 1991 to 1995, the cost increased $42 million. Probably because the estimate provided in the initial study was a guess and not based on a study to determine the actual cost. This was well beyond the Lake Management District's financial capability. Today, based on the Capitol Lake Estuary Project dredging calculations, which used 2022 costs, and understanding that Capitol Lake is smaller than Lake Lawrence, the cost for dredging Lake Lawrence was estimated at over $250 million, assuming near-site locations could be identified to deposit the sediment. The conclusion was that dredging the lake was never going to be financially feasible unless someone won the lottery and donated the money, even though it was the ultimate solution and recommendation. Other methods would need to be explored. What is known in these areas on Lake Lawrence, that they were filled in by sediment, became much shallower, now only 1 to 6 feet deep, and much more susceptible to aquatic plant growth, much like what happened to Capitol Lake. According to the lake restoration study, the shallow or littoral areas of the lake make up 38%, or 126 acres of the total lake surface. There are 4 types of aquatic plants, as can be seen here, that flourish in Lake Lawrence in these littoral areas. They are shoreland, emergent, floating, and submerged. We will address all 4 of these as they pertain to Lake Lawrence. Lake Lawrence has some noxious and invasive species in each of these categories. The shoreland plants include narrowleaf cattail, a non-native invasive species that was found in the southwest end of our lake in 2020 during a lake survey. It is capable of displacing native plants, changing the genetic profile of native cattail stands, altering marsh habitat and invading aquatic systems. This plant was immediately treated by Thurston County noxious weed and eliminated. We have not seen any more since. Purple loosestrife, a Class B non-native invasive species, identified on Lake Lawrence shorelines in several locations in 2012 and treated annually by Thurston County Noxious Weed Department until 2021. We did not see any in 2022 and only a couple stands in 2023 that were dug out and disposed of by Lake Management District volunteers. Yellow flag iris, a Class C non-native noxious weed, was identified on Lake Lawrence during the 2004 Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan Study, or IVAP, but efforts to control it did not start until 2013. Unfortunately, the yellow flag iris had proliferated and could be found everywhere in large numbers. Several individuals and pets were harmed by this plant. In 2013, a yellow flag iris assessment and mapping survey was done by the County Noxious Weed Department. In 2014, flyers and other educational material were disseminated to our residents, and our aquatic resource specialist encouraged our shoreline residents to clip and remove seed pods while wearing gloves, long-sleeve shirt, and pants. Residents wanting to see this noxious weed gone complied and went up and down the shoreline, wading in the water, towing small boats behind them to collect the stems and seed pods of yellow flag iris. These efforts did not work as the plant was out of control and infested all shoreline and wetland areas, many locations where local residents could not access. After 2 years, it was determined that mechanical removal of this plant was not possible and was dangerous. In 2015, at the urging of the Lake Management District Steering Committee, Thurston County designated yellow flag iris as a Class C noxious weed and identified it specifically for eradication on Lake Lawrence. Washington State had already designated yellow flag iris as a Class C noxious weed in 2002. Some grant funds for control of yellow flag iris was made available by the state. In 2015, the first chemical application to eradicate yellow flag iris was done. 8.58 gallons of imazapyr was used. Yellow flag iris treatment continued every year since, partially funded by grants and the remainder by LMD funds. Each year, less chemical had to be used to treat. In 2023, less than 2.5 gallons of imazapyr was used, a 66% reduction since 2015. Yellow flag iris is being eradicated, but continued efforts need to be sustained or it will come back. In 2023, a YouTube video was made to show shoreline residents and community managers how to manually remove yellow flag iris safely. Currently, 2/3 of the Lake Lawrence shoreline can be managed safely and effectively by hand pulling or digging the yellow flag iris, and chemical treatment of these areas is no longer necessary. Some emergent plants. In 2013, parrot feather, a Class B non-native invasive species, was found on the canal at Lake Lawrence and quickly eliminated by the Thurston County Noxious Weed Department. It has not been seen since. Floating plants. And fragrant water lily, a Class C noxious weed, was first identified prior to 1986 when Lake Lawrence became a lake management district. Initial estimates identified 88 plus acres of fragrant water lily covering the south end of Lake Lawrence and the area to the east of Goat Island. In 1994, as part of this study, 13 Lake Management District volunteers started removing fragrant water lily with a county-owned backhoe mounted on a barge. This process is known as rotovation. Rotovation is defined as a mechanical control method of tilling lake or river sediment to physically dislodge rooted plants, also known as bottom tillage or derooting. Essentially, what happens is you remove large mats of floating vegetation or aquatic plants by digging up the roots to prevent further expansion of the plant. You filter out the muck and load the roots and vegetation on a barge or other platform, haul it to the shoreline, load it onto dump trucks, and dispose of it. This effort continued through 1995, and it was estimated that over 300 tons of lily tubers were removed from the lake. Even with this massive mechanical control effort, long-term control of fragrant water lily was not obtained. This method appeared to be causing the spread of fragrant water lilies to uninfested areas of the lake. The smallest fragment of fragrant water lily can grow to an adult plant in just 1 year. As a result, this practice was stopped. In 1996, after rotovation of the lily did not work, the county approved the use of rodeo to treat the 80 plus acres of fragrant water lily that still covered 25% of Lake Lawrence, but that had spread to many other areas of the lake. Rodeo, a chemical known to be safe for use in and around water bodies, was used. The treatment showed immediate results. In 1997, rodeo and later imazapyr was used to spot treat fragrant water lily that were missed in 1996. 10 acres were spot treated in 2000, another 2 acres in 2003, and 1 to 2 acres in 2008, 10, 13, 20, and 2022. For the past 5 years, Lake Management District volunteers have hand-pulled fragrant water lily during lake surveys when isolated plants were found. This has helped reduce the spread of the plant by continuous monitoring through our monthly surveys, April through September. We are able to identify growth of noxious and invasive weed species early, and if possible, remove them by hand or treat with less chemicals than would otherwise be necessary if left unattended. Efforts have continued since, with a 99% reduction in fragrant water lily in Lake Lawrence. Current efforts for shoreline and community park managers to pull it when seen, report location of larger bunches of plants, and periodically, every couple of years as needed, the Lake Management District contracts to treat large bunches of plant to prevent it from returning in large numbers. A YouTube video was made to show shoreline residents how to manually remove fragrant water lily. Cal lily, or spatterdock, is a native lily to Lake Lawrence. No formal effort has been undertaken to remove this plant from the lake. Some cal lily has been removed only when it impedes recreation, navigation, or swimming. Residents are encouraged to cut, pull, or dig cal lily plants if they become a problem around their docks or community swim areas. Water shield is another native lily to Lake Lawrence. It is relatively slow growing and has not presented any issues. Residents are instructed to pull, cut, or dig these plants out from their shorelines if they become a problem. As this map shows, the littoral and conservation areas around the lake that are 1 to 6 feet deep is where 90% of the submerged aquatic vegetation grows. The 2004 Integrated Aquatic Vegetation Management Plan, or IVAMP, further identified the vast growth of aquatic vegetation and recommended weed harvesting to be used in selected areas to remove tons of vegetation and chemicals to be used where needed to reduce vegetation biomass that contributes to toxic algae blooms and reduced dissolved oxygen levels impacting fish and invertebrates. As we have already explained, harvesting was causing the spread of aquatic vegetation. Usually requires repeat harvest during the vegetation growth period to keep vegetation low enough to prevent harm to recreation and is costly at over $2,000 an acre. In 2008, sonar was approved for use. From 2008 to 2015, an average of 36 acres were treated with sonar each year. Sonar is effective to control only certain types of aquatic vegetation, is slow to control the vegetation, and because of cost and county use restrictions, only a limited number of acres can be treated. Vast areas of the lake remained untreated, and other types of vegetation continued to proliferate and spread around the lake. In 2016, large areas were found to have curly pondweed, a non-native invasive species. Sonar was not effective on this aquatic weed. Efforts were made to obtain approval of aquathol to specifically target curly pondweed. This approval was not obtained until 2018, when aquathol was used for the first time to control curly pondweed. Although aquathol was effective at controlling curly pondweed, it was a contact chemical, which meant it would kill the stem of the plant, but not the root system, so the plant came back every year. Aquathol had to be reapplied year after year. Aquathol was not effective against the other pondweeds, so these plants quickly got out of control. Because we were unable to treat these other weeds to prevent their growth, the Lake Management District purchased weed rakes and loaned them out to shoreline residents to rake the weeds around their docks and shorelines. These weed rakes are still available and used by lake residents when weeds around their dock and shoreline become a problem. From 2016 to 2023, an average of 22 acres were treated with either sonar or aquathol, a significant reduction of areas treated. In 2013, a new systemic chemical, Gallium SC, was approved by the county that specifically targets curly pondweed, the entire plant, to include roots. The intention is to be able to eliminate this invasive species from the lake so as to reduce the amount and frequency with which chemicals need to be applied. Unfortunately, galleon is not very effective against the other nuisance weed species, so sonar will still need to be used to control them. Algae problems at Lake Lawrence has always been a problem. As we have already explained, this 1991 study of Lake Lawrence by Raymer, Chin, and Mayo from Seattle showed the primary cause of the observed water quality problems and biological impacts to Lake Lawrence was excessive levels of nutrients, especially phosphorus. The primary thing we can do to prevent further phosphorus accumulation in the lake is to reduce decomposition of tons of aquatic vegetation by removing or preventing it from growing. We have done that since 1986 and will continue to do so as long as the Lake Management District continues to operate. The other thing we can do is to sequester or lock in the phosphorus being released from the sediment and groundwater aquifer sources in the bottom of the lake by applying chemicals like alum, Phoslock, and possibly others. These pictures show how a treatment is applied and basically what it looks like. Aluminum sulfate, called alum, when added to lake water, removes phosphates through precipitation, forming a heavier than water particulate known as flock. This flock then settles to the lake bottom to create a barrier that retards sediment phosphorus release. This requires huge amounts of money and a special study that Lake Lawrence commissioned in April 2024. It will be completed in March or April 2025, and then we will know what the best practices are to reduce or eliminate phosphorus release, that is the primary cause of toxic algae, and how much it will cost. We will follow up with another video once that study is completed to provide details on what we intend to do, how much it will cost, and how we propose to secure the funding to do it. Subscribe to this channel to get automatic notifications when new videos are added to your YouTube channel. The study in 1991 also showed that 7% of the phosphorus nutrient load in the lake comes from construction, overland flows, and precipitation, runoff, yard fertilizer, pet, other animal, and waterfowl waste, septic tanks, etc. These are the things there are things we can all and should do to reduce this 7% to as close to zero as we possibly can. We will briefly describe what we have done, what you can do, and what we intend to do moving forward for each of these. Under construction, the County Shoreline Master Program, or SMP, provides explicit guidance on code compliance in this area. One of our steering committee members is on the County Planning Commission and participated in the rewrite of this program over the past several years to ensure codes were updated to protect our lake. The final SMP is currently at the Department of Ecology for final review and approval, and will then be approved by the Thurston County Commissioners by the end of 2024. Local residents continue to be mindful of construction and calling out neighbors that violate best practices. Several properties have had stop work orders placed on them over the past couple of years because building codes and permits were not adhered to. Overland flows, precipitation, yard fertilizer, and pesticides need to be considered together, as they are closely related as to cause and preventative measures. Lake Management District Steering Committee members closely monitor stormwater ditches and culverts to ensure they remain open. If a problem is identified, the county stormwater utility is notified. Lake Lawrence has very few culverts that drain stormwater into the lake, but there are a few. Steering committee members routinely clean out the stormwater drain at the public boat launch seen here in these pictures, a picture from before it was cleaned and after, to ensure precipitation flows through the drain and sump before it flows into the lake. Overland flow of contaminants come from private property lawns and gardens that use fertilizers and herbicides. The study showed this was present in and around the lake. According to the study, it contributes less than 4% of the annual phosphorus or nutrient load to the lake. However, that study was done back in 1991. Development over the past 30 years may have increased this percentage. Any impact is too much, and this is something we all need to focus on. We can impact this with very little effort. We just need to be careful of what type of products we use around the lake. Don't use fertilizers or pesticides from the back of your house to the lake shoreline. Plant native vegetation along the shoreline and pick up pet waste. The Lake Management District has repeatedly addressed these type of contaminants at annual meetings with guest speakers, newsletters, YouTube videos, and HOA rules. Although we cannot be certain of the total impact of these efforts, we continually monitor shoreline lawns and gardens during our monthly lake surveys between April and September of each year to see who is watering and fertilizing their lawns and then talking directly to those homeowners and sending them information about the harm they could be causing to the lake's water quality. We also strongly encourage shoreline owners to plant native vegetation between their home and shoreline and allow vegetation to grow along the shorelines. More and more are doing this. Every year, Lake Management District volunteers boat out to the Bureau of Land Management Island to clean up any debris left by people visiting the island. This usually results in the collection of 1 to 2 large garbage bags of trash. When needed, a lake cleanup party is organized to remove debris from the lake. During this cleanup in 2022, over 3 tons of debris from styrofoam floats and pieces of floats, tires, plastic, and other things was removed from the lake. Every year for at least the past 15 years, Lake Management District volunteers have walked the public boat launch and county park trails and clean up trash left by visitors. 1 to 3 trash bags are picked up every week. Pet and other animal and waterfowl waste. Every person needs to pick up after their pets, even in your own yard if you live on the lake. Pet bags are available in our community parks. Please use them. As we do weekly cleanup along the county park, our volunteers also pick up pet feces when they find it. Waterfowl waste. Geese feces alone was calculated to contribute 73,000 to 91,000 pounds a year to our lake. As a result of the number of geese and the facts presented, numerous lake residents banded together to raise money and contract with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who has responsibility over migrating waterfowl, to have them come out into the Lake Lawrence area, assess the situation, and remove as many geese as possible. In June 2022, 154 geese were removed from the lake. Water quality during the summer of 2022 improved greatly. Over the past 2 years, the resident geese population has once again grown to approximately 175. Additional efforts by the United States Department of Agriculture to monitor, assess, and if necessary remove additional geese from Lake Lawrence is continuing in an effort to reduce highly nutrient-rich feces from the water and improve our water quality. Septic systems are tough to control and monitor. It requires individual property owners to do the right thing and monitor their on-site septic systems regularly to ensure good operation. Residents are encouraged to notify neighbors when they suspect septic system problems. A year ago, a resident reported someone with an RV dumping their waste onto the roadway adjacent to the lake and reported it to the County Environmental Health Office, who took quick action. This is the type of observance and action needed. No one wants to swim or fish in a lake contaminated by human waste. Gutters are another source of stormwater flow and can be turned into a positive instead of a negative by installing sumps and rain gardens. There are numerous videos online that provide great examples, are relatively inexpensive, and enhance the beauty of your home, waterfront, and simultaneously protect the lake. The limited number of aquatic chemicals that we are allowed to use in Thurston County water bodies to treat noxious, invasive, and nuisance submerged vegetation has resulted in higher costs and more frequent treatment, requiring almost annual treatment of submerged vegetation to keep it controlled and prevent explosion of weeds that are harmful to the lake, wildlife, and recreational use. Through our vigilant, boots-on-the-ground volunteer efforts, we have been very successful in early identification and control of noxious, invasive, and nuisance aquatic plants and weeds. Our goal has always been to reduce this 7% of human and animal contamination to as near zero as possible by continuing to be good stewards of our lake and to improve water quality through early identification, early selective and targeted treatment of aquatic vegetation, by mechanical means and methods first, like harvesting, pulling, dredging, if possible, as the first choice, to reduce use of chemicals and keep our lakes as clean and healthy as humanly possible, given the scarce resources we have. Our efforts benefit all local, county, and state citizens. Chemical applications are used only as a last resort and only where needed. We are constantly searching for other methods, techniques, and solutions. A future video will explain the results of a study that was just commissioned to determine what can and should be done to control toxic algae in Lake Lawrence, which will greatly improve lake water quality and sustain its beauty and recreational benefit for future generations. The difficulty that we see is cost. How are we going to fund both control of submerged vegetation and reduction of toxic algae blooms? The process and treatment is not cheap, costing Long Lake and other lakes in our region over $200,000 a year. Our annual budgets are currently $124,000 at Lake Lawrence, and that is barely enough to cover the cost of submerged aquatic vegetation control. As we described during this video, volunteers and good stewards of our precious lake are needed. We encourage your participation. Subscribe to this YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen so you know what has been done, what is being done now, and what is intended for the future. The Lake Lawrence Lake Management District website at lakelawrencelakeManagementDistrict.com provides digital copies of studies, lake surveys, water sampling and testing over the years, and much more. Now we will provide you with a couple other videos that you may find interesting and expand upon what you just watched. One is the history of Lake Lawrence, and another is Death of a Lake, which was the first video in this series. Thank you for watching.